I used to cling to the old adage that a family's strength lay in its unbreakable unity, that a father's role was to be the steadfast anchor, holding everyone together against any storm. It was a beautiful, comforting belief, one that crumbled spectacularly the day I finally understood that true protection sometimes means cutting the very ties that bind you. Oliver, my son, had just celebrated his 10th birthday. If you were to meet him, you'd be immediately disarmed by the quiet depth of his soul. He's the kind of boy who finds a fragile, wounded bird on the sidewalk and nurses it back to health with a tenderness that belies his age. He'd rather lose himself in a book under a blanket fort, a flashlight casting a warm circle of light, than be the center of attention. His voice is a gentle murmur, his thoughts profound and considered, and in his entire life, I had never once heard him raise it in anger. My wife, Rebecca, saw his gentleness not as a virtue, but as a flaw, a weakness that needed to be corrected. She often said he was too soft for this world, that he needed to toughen up. I, on the other hand, saw it as his most extraordinary gift, a quiet strength that would one day make him a remarkable man. The birthday party was a perfect microcosm of our different visions for our son. Oliver had asked for a small gathering, a quiet afternoon, with his 3 closest friends in our backyard. He finds solace in intimate connections, not grand performances. Rebecca, however, had commandeered the occasion. She had invited nearly half the neighborhood, hired a clown with an unnervingly loud laugh, and filled our yard with so many decorations it looked like a party supply store had exploded. I had a gnawing feeling of dread, a premonition that this wasn't just a party. It was an elaborate stage for a lesson she intended to teach. For months, Rebecca had been on a crusade to fix Oliver. She had enrolled him in public speaking classes that left him drained and silent, forced him onto the debate team where he would often freeze, and relentlessly compared him to his cousins who were boisterous and outgoing. She called it building confidence, but I was beginning to see the truth. She was trying to mold him into someone else entirely, someone she could be proud of in front of her friends. The breaking point arrived just after the singing of Happy Birthday. Oliver had just blown out the candles on his cake, a small, hopeful smile on his face, when Rebecca stood up. In her hand was a rented microphone, a cruel, metallic object that seemed utterly out of place in our humble yard. She tapped it twice, and the sound echoed, silencing the festive chatter. "Oliver has a special message he'd like to share with everyone," she announced, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that grated on my ears. "He's been working on a special thank you speech for all of you wonderful people who came to celebrate with him." I watched in horror as all the color drained from Oliver's face. His eyes, wide with panic, met mine in a desperate, silent plea. There had been no speech. This was news to him, a brutal surprise sprung upon him in front of a captive audience. His hands began to tremble. I started to rise, but Rebecca's sharp, warning gaze froze me in place. She had made it clear. Interfere, and I would be undermining her authority. "Come on, Oliver," she cajoled, holding the microphone out to him. "Everyone's waiting to hear from the birthday boy." Oliver shook his head slowly, a barely audible whisper escaping his lips. "I didn't prepare anything, Mom. I don't want to." "Nonsense," Rebecca interrupted, her smile unwavering, though a hard edge had crept into her voice. "Just say a few words. Thank everyone for coming. It's your party after all." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. 30 adults and a dozen children stared, their gazes a heavy weight on a 10-year-old boy who was visibly spiraling. Oliver's breathing became shallow and rapid. I knew these signs, the precursors to a full-blown panic attack, yet I remained seated, immobilized by Rebecca's unspoken threat. "Oliver," she said again, a clear warning in her tone. "People are waiting." "I can't," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "Please, I just can't." In that moment, her mask of maternal sweetness finally shattered. In front of every guest, she snatched the microphone back and pointed a shaking finger at our son. "Speak up, you coward!" she shouted, her voice amplified and distorted by the microphone, a monstrous roar across the neighborhood. Stop being such a pathetic little mouse and say something, anything. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." The silence that followed her outburst was absolute. Guests started awkwardly gathering their belongings, while others simply stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A mother had just called her son a coward at his own birthday party. I followed Oliver inside, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I found him in his bedroom closet, a tiny, trembling ball of tears, his knees drawn to his chest. I knelt and held him, stroking his back as his sobs racked his small body. When he finally spoke, his words were a whisper that shattered me. "Daddy," he choked out, his voice muffled by my shirt. "I know why I can't talk in front of people. I know why Mom gets so angry about it." I pulled back, looking into his tear-streaked face. "What do you mean, buddy?" "I heard her on the phone with Aunt Lisa last week," he said, his voice barely audible. "She said she's embarrassed to have a son like me. She said she wishes I was more like Cousin Brett, who's loud and funny and not scared of anything. She said maybe if she pushes me hard enough, I'll stop being such a disappointment." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just the words she'd said. It was the realization that my son had been carrying this crushing weight for a week, believing that his very nature was a source of shame for his mother. In that moment, the anchor I had been trying to be for our family was instead a chain dragging my son down. That night, after the last guest had left and the silence of our home had returned, I made a decision that would change everything. I started recording every interaction between Rebecca and Oliver. At first, it was a desperate attempt to show her the damage she was doing, to hold up a mirror to her behavior. The recordings painted a devastating picture: the constant criticism, the casual cruelty, the relentless comparisons, her palpable frustration with his quiet, gentle spirit. But as I listened, I heard something else, something I had been too close to see. It wasn't just disappointment, it was jealousy. Rebecca wasn't just frustrated with Oliver, she was jealous of him. Jealous of his connection with me, a bond built on quiet understanding. Jealous of his creativity, his emotional intelligence, the very qualities that made him special. She was trying to break those qualities out of him because she couldn't stand being around someone who made her feel inadequate simply by being himself. She was trying to break the boy she couldn't control because his existence was a silent rebuke to her own. The next family gathering was at Rebecca's sister's house. As usual, Rebecca began her campaign, urging Oliver to speak up, to interact more with his cousins, to stop being so withdrawn. When Oliver politely declined to join a group game, her frustration boiled over. "Why can't you just be normal?" she snapped at him in front of the entire family. "Why do you have to make everything so difficult?" That was the moment I chose. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from his birthday party. The room went silent as Rebecca's voice, amplified and sharp, echoed through the living room. "Speak up, you coward. Stop being such a pathetic little mouse." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's mother burst into tears. Her sister, with a voice full of hurt and shock, asked her to leave. Oliver looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Pure, unadulterated relief. Someone had finally stood up for him. Someone had finally given voice to the unspoken truth. Rebecca tried to minimize it, claiming she was having a bad day, that the pressure of the party had gotten to her. But I played more recordings, a horrifying montage of months of casual cruelty, of emotional manipulation, and of a mother's calculated chipping away at her son's spirit. The family that had always enabled her behavior, dismissing it as tough love, finally saw it for the abuse it was. The divorce was swift. Rebecca fought for custody, claiming I had manipulated our son, turned him against her with the recordings. But the family court judge listened to everyone. When Rebecca tried to argue that she was simply trying to build confidence in a shy child, the judge asked her a single, definitive question that ended the hearing. "In any of these recordings, Mrs. Chen," the judge said, his voice quiet and firm, "can you point to a single moment where you expressed love, Acceptance or pride in your son exactly as he is? Rebecca could not answer. There wasn't one. I have full custody now. Oliver still speaks softly, still loses himself in books, and still feels a profound empathy for every wounded bird he finds. But the difference is that he now knows these qualities make him special, not defective. He has started writing his own stories, creating art, and has made a few close friends who appreciate his gentle nature. Rebecca sends birthday cards and calls occasionally, but Oliver gets to decide whether or not he wants to talk to her. Usually, he doesn't. He is learning that love should never require you to become someone else. I thought I was saving my family by staying quiet, by trying to hold everything together. I was wrong. I was sacrificing my son for a false sense of peace. The hardest lesson I ever learned was that some people will try to break what they can't understand. And if you let them, they will convince everyone that the breaking was not only justified, but necessary. Oliver turned 11 last month. We had a small party in the backyard with 3 close friends, a homemade cake, and no microphone. When it was time to thank everyone, Oliver stood up on his own, a calm, confident smile on his face. "Thanks for being here," he said, his voice soft but clear, "and for letting me be myself." It was the most beautiful speech I had ever heard.